Good afternoon. I think we're gonna get started here. It's 2:40, so I'm gonna share my screen away and just get moving. Thank you so much for joining me today and welcome. I'm Amber Foucault. I am the VP of Product Management at Sensibill, and today's talk is going to be the secret sauce to ML and AI powered products. So I actually gave this talk a few weeks back with a much more product management lens on it. But I really do think that it applies to the ML and AI engineer and scientist community as well, because there's something to be said, certainly, about the way that data gets used inside of products. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today. We're super familiar with this Venn diagram. I think it's been around for decades now. The idea that product market fit exists at the intersection of a user, technology, and business. And I mean, certainly that's the case. But when I really stop and think about how data plays a role in there, I think it deserves its own solo act. It deserves to be pulled out and really thought about differently in terms of product market fit and how it is that you might achieve that. When I gave this talk the last time, I really used the jazz analogy as I got into the idea of building data products. And that jazz analogy was used in the sense that there's a lot of improvisation that happens when you're building products. And so I like to think of data as that saxophone. You really want to give it the space in order for it to sing and do its own thing. The product ideation and prototyping process has long been in practice. This idea that, from a conceptual standpoint, you get a good understanding of what problems you're trying to solve. You cast a very wide net, and you slowly get closer and closer to what it is that you want to be able to prototype or test. And this is a really valuable process. Google's come up with their own sprints as a result of it. There's tons of companies that have had methodologies around for this forever. I'm not really here to talk to you about that, but what I am here to talk to you about is sort of what I think is the inverse of this funnel for what needs to happen when we're talking about building data products. And so it looks a little bit like this. It's at the very top of, or the most narrow part of this upside down funnel is this precise problem. And I'm going to go through each of these with you over the next few slides and kind of explain why I really believe this is the secret sauce to building those products. And, from the point of defining that precise problem, you move into POC, validation, you add in data sets, you bring the UX team into the forefront of it, you may pass through an additional validation stage, and from there you develop a concept. And once you have that concept, it kind of kicks you back into the funnel next to it and make sure that you go back through those stages to really truly test out what's in that prototype. Now, when we're at that top of the funnel on defining those precise problems, there's different types of framework that you can use. I'm not really too fussy on it. Your product management team probably helps you with this precise problem definition. I've got an affinity for the jobs to be done framework. From my perspective, it really helps define and categorize and capture those customer needs. Those goals in that framework tend to fall into one of two categories. There's this idea of be goals, which is I want to be something else, and this idea of do goals, I want to do something else. So there's this intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm talking to you about this as the ML AI team members, but there's a real empathy that comes along with understanding what those jobs to be done mean. And that's what I'm really calling the secret sauce here. It's important to have a culture that breaks down the silos between that product team and that machine learning or data and AI team that ensures there's this rich empathy and understanding that's happening between them so that those jobs to be done are really rooted inside of users and what you're trying to solve in order to help those users. And so as much as I think that, there's a lot of secret sauce in here, engineer, that proof of concept really starts to sing when there's a true understanding of what it is precisely you're trying to get done with the data. From there, it sort of moves on into validation, and there's different ways depending on the type of product, depending on where you are in the maturity of the product. People talk a lot about MVPs. This is the idea of an MAP threshold or MAP threshold. It's your minimum algorithmic performance. Definitely something that the ML teams need to sit down with the product teams and work through together. This is a really important threshold to get some agreements on and make sure that everybody is clearly aware of where and how this is working in order to drive continued success. You know, a lot of data products are really expensive to build. And so if you're going to be starting from a cold start, you need to be able to understand what types of investment are required. And often that comes out inside of this validation idea. So depending on where you are from those jobs to be done perspective, you can get a good handle on this. I'll give you this idea of the spectrum. On the left-hand side, you know, your map could be at 0. And that would give you, that would be something that gives you value from day one. So perhaps it's streamlined data entry. On the other side, you know, you've got AI is central to the product. As an example, it's matching human accuracy. So, you know, we've seen a lot of healthcare applications start up recently. Anything they're doing in that healthcare space is going to require those high levels of human accuracy. And so you would want to be able to make sure that you had a really high map score there to be able to match that. A good way of thinking about this to kind of gut check as you're working through it is to ask yourself whether you're a first mover and work together with your product team to understand what first mover kind of looks like. If you are indeed a first mover, it's probably okay for your map score to be a little bit lower. If you're not and you're on the other side, then you're going to really want to be vigilant in making sure that that map score has a significantly high and growing threshold. Adding in data sets. This is an important conversation we have at Sensibill all the time. It's an important one to consider. And, you know, we use the term data network effect quite often, and I just want to make sure that there's a clear understanding of what the definition of that data network effect is. A property of a product that improves with the more data it has available to emergent relationships between segments of data. So think about TikTok. You know, they're one who's come out with a really sophisticated algorithm, a great algorithm. They've got what's called the data network effect. And what they're doing is building a moat around their business. And if you're in product, if you're a tech company or startup, those are the golden words right now that are going to help propel your product forward. It shouldn't be confused with a network effect, which is the more people that use the service, the more useful that becomes. And you can think of Yelp. And although Yelp has saved me from eating at a ton of bad restaurants, it certainly has a fairly replicable model. Next, you've got that user experience. I'm going to pull in a quote here from Paul. I don't know Paul. I've read his Medium article a while ago, and I always really loved this. I thought it was really nice and succinct. The primary goal of a data experience design lies not only in the simplification of complex workflows, but covers the entirety of the data consumption process. And so, you know, really sitting down with your UX team as an ML or, you know, AI engineer and helping them understand how you approach the data set and what that data set looks like, giving them a chance to play with it, helping them know where and how that validation is coming from, what things look like from a cold start perspective. It's really about deeply understanding that relationship between data, time, consumption, and recurring workflows that help to make sure that the UX on that data product is really well connected. Because once this has an opportunity to be properly tested inside of a prototype, you're going to want data to play second fiddle to the UX. And, you know, I can't do a presentation ever without quoting Steve Jobs. You know, he's the one who said it best. Design is not how it looks, it's actually how it works. And this comes even into more play when you are a data product. So just to kind of circle back on, what is a 10-minute presentation, but what could easily be an hour that we could talk about, really flipping the funnel and understanding precise problems as a PM has helped me be more effective. But even more so, the secret sauce of really getting to a concept is working together to break down some of those silos and building a culture of empathy that helps make sure there's a full connection there. Thank you very much. I think we have a few minutes for questions. Great. Well, guys, if you have any questions, how do you blend hardware and software with data and ML? The hardware part is definitely difficult, but there isn't really a difference in terms of the steps that you're going to walk through when you're involving hardware along with it. It really does depend on what the relationship between the hardware is to the software, and whether or not there's like, things like over-the-air update capabilities, whether or not the software is driving the function specifically from a hardware perspective. But regardless, you're going to sort of take the same approach in really understanding what that precise problem is that you're going to solve, and getting to a place of knowing how to validate it really, really quickly will help you understand whether that POC is viable or not. Before this year, no one was really talking about perishable data. Perishable data wasn't something that a lot of ML teams were worried about, but all of a sudden we're in the middle of a pandemic, and last year's consumer data is no longer relevant in this year's consumer data. So when we start thinking about what those variables look like, you've got to be really, really consistent with that due diligence in the validation stage. Hopefully that helps. Does it make sense to add dev team into the POC? Absolutely it does. And it kind of depends on how your organization is mapped and where responsibilities sit. Some people have their ML and AI teams very separate, and maybe the back-end teams handle those pushes to different environments. But regardless of how you're kind of set up, the way I look at it is you've got to think about technology as a verb and not a noun. And we can all get behind the idea that this tech is going to help us get somewhere, help us solve a problem, help us create something, build something. And so the more people that understand what that verb is that you're trying to achieve, the better shot you've got at solving it. At Sensibill, do you run cross-functional teams through the entire funnel? What are the challenges you encounter in that? There can be a lot of meetings. I'm not going to lie. It's that first piece out of the gate where you're trying to get everyone aligned to what is going to happen, from a jobs to be done perspective and a POC, where it's the roughest piece. That's really crossing the chasm there. But once you get through that part, roles and definitions of roles start to become a little bit clearer. One of the tricks that I use all the time is I do a pre-mortem before we start the POC. What are all the things that can go wrong? Who do we need available to us to make sure that we get through those things in the best way possible? And so that's a really solid trick that I use. It definitely helps. In your PM experience, what collective behaviors and actions have you seen or of that can help data-driven or ML startup scale? So scaling becomes tricky on two fronts. One, it's sort of, you can put 9 women in a room, but you certainly can't have a baby in a month. So really thinking through what that addition of people and scale is going to mean, particularly on the ML team. You've got to be really cautious and make sure that the timing is right as you're adding people to those teams so that it doesn't affect your deliverables in a bad way. So what I will say is there has to be as significant amount of planning in that scale as there would where you're building a product. So sit back and start to understand adding 1 to 2 people at a time, what that does to your sprints, how you separate down your teams, how that affects you cross-functionally, and what layers you're kind of adding there. I think I'm at time. Thank you guys so much for the great questions. You can check out our Sensibill booth. We've got the team there, and or you can find me on LinkedIn. It was nice to meet everybody. Thank you so much.